There was stunning news last night in Brazil, which, even for those of you who don't pay close attention to politics in Brazil, despite its huge size and geostrategic importance, deserves a great deal of attention. It's the first instance linking the family of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro to the assassination of Marielle Franco. It's not proof, but it's definitely concrete evidence. Many of you probably remember that in March of 2018, Marielle was brutally assassinated, and it reverberated around the world because of her trajectory as a black LGBT woman raised in a favela in Rio de Janeiro, who was elected to the Rio City Council in 2016 with a huge vote total and had a limitless political future, and her life was snuffed out one night sociopathically when she left an event about black women changing politics in Brazil. The killers of Marielle, the two individuals who are alleged to have driven the car and pulled the trigger, unsurprisingly were arrested a year later and turned out to be former members of the military police in Rio. It was always assumed that one of the most notorious militias in Brazil, called the Crime Office, known for carrying out executions with huge degrees of professionalism and exactitude because they're composed of former members of the military and police, or oftentimes active members, were the ones who carried out the murder. But even then, the question was who ordered and paid for Marielle's assassination. Almost immediately after Bolsonaro was elected, there began emerging all sorts of coincidental and circumstantial links between the Bolsonaro family and that militia, including the fact that Bolsonaro's son, who had just been elected to a position as a federal senator, had spent the prior 10 years as a state legislator employing in his cabinet the wife and mother of the chief of the militia that carried out this murder. Beyond that, the alleged shooter of Marielle happened to live in the exact same gated community in Rio de Janeiro as where Bolsonaro lived, which was a huge coincidence given how sprawling of a city Rio de Janeiro is, with 10 million people, depending on how you count. And it raised the question of how this former police officer and Bolsonaro lived in a luxury condominium together. And it also emerged that the son of Bolsonaro, President Bolsonaro, was dating the daughter of the ex-police officer who was arrested for having assassinated Marielle, pulling the trigger. But those were just coincidental or circumstantial links between the family and the militia. Last night was something much graver and darker. Globo's flagship news program, Jornal Nacional, reported that on the day of Marielle's murder, the driver of the car, according to the police that murdered Marielle, went to the gated community where Bolsonaro lives and told the doorman at the gate that he was there to visit the house of Jair Bolsonaro. The doorman then called that house, 58 is the address, according to logs that he kept, and the person in the house said that the person who wanted to enter, who the police have now identified as the driver of the car that killed Marielle, was permitted to enter that gated community. The doorman says that he believed it was Jair Bolsonaro who gave the okay for that person to enter the house, although that was probably not the case, given that Bolsonaro, at the time a congressman, was in Brasilia, not in Rio, on that date. But Bolsonaro owns not only that house, but a house very close to it on the same street in which his son, Carlos, who was served on the same Rio de Janeiro City Council as Marielle and is known as being a very aggressive and unhinged mastermind of Bolsonaro's online communication strategy, lived in that same gated community and appears to have been in Rio de Janeiro on that date. But certainly it raises the very pressing question of who is it in President Jair Bolsonaro's house that authorized the person now arrested as the driver of the car to enter that gated community in order to meet with the other ex-police officer who's accused to be the actual shooter, the puller of the trigger that pumped 4 bullets into Marielle's head on March 14th, 2018. There's recordings of the calls made by the doorman at the gate that the police are now trying to recover to hear which voice it is in Jair Bolsonaro's house who authorized the driver of the car to enter that gated community just hours before Marielle was murdered. Last night, after the news broke by Globo, Jair Bolsonaro, who revealingly is in Saudi Arabia, where he's met with the crown prince and heaped praise on him, calling him almost like a brother, recorded a very deranged, rambling video against Globo, against the governor of the state of Rio de Janeiro, who he blamed for the leak, against virtually everybody. It was angry and rambling and unhinged. And then this morning, reporting broke that Bolsonaro has ordered his justice minister, who controls the federal police, Sergio Moro, to intervene in the investigation into this murder and re-interview the doorman to obtain what Bolsonaro calls clarity about who it was that he spoke with. Obviously, it's extremely grave to have any kind of evidence linking the family that rules Brazil to the militia that murdered Marielle Franco, that assassinated her in cold blood. We've had that evidence of that linkage for some time, but it's far more grave still to have concrete, definitive, documentary, and testimonial evidence, not proof, but evidence, linking the Bolsonaro family itself, the home where President Bolsonaro lives and that he owns, to the two killers, according to the police, who ended Marielle's life. It obviously raises very serious questions about who it was in President Bolsonaro's house that authorized the alleged driver of the car to enter that gated community hours before Marielle was murdered. And that's the news that has rocked Brazil.